you really got into the Superhot game more so than I did.
Yeah. I thought you were gonna be just as into it, but you seem to not have caught on the same way I did. I think something about that game really speaks to my instincts. I really like games that push me to the edge of like trying to survive every scenario like by the skin of my teeth, because certain games I feel like these days are so easy that it's like they expect you to make your own fun and invent your own stakes. Like they have like scoreboards and things. This game actually surprisingly doesn't have a leaderboard, even though it's so skill based.
Yeah, you would think that it would. Right? It sort of lends itself to that because it has like bite-sized environments that you can finish in a fairly quick amount of time.
Right.
Right. And it seems like, okay, that would be perfect for like a leaderboard setup. Like how quickly can you speed run through this thing? And there are modes that you unlock after you beat the main story mode.
Right. But none of them are competitive. And I wouldn't be surprised if the game has a leaderboard patched into it, some sort of competitive option, but I see why it's not necessary, because for me, I'm competing with myself every time that I play it, and I'm on this treadmill where I'm trying to be faster, and I'm trying to have better instincts when I'm shooting these guys in slow motion, and throwing my gun at them and then grabbing their gun and then shooting another guy with a sword and throwing his sword through two guys. These are really complicated moves that I've gotten used to by doing them like hundreds of times. And it's like a really unique, cool experience.
And let me be clear, because we said at the beginning that, you got way more into it than I did. And it's not that I don't like it. I actually really, I don't think enjoy is the right word for it. I really was engaged with this game. It definitely is like such a unique experience. I think part of it is, you said that it fits your instincts. I think it's the exact opposite for me. Instinctually, the slowdown mechanic is so weird that it feels really hard for me to do. That doesn't mean it's bad at all, actually. I want to make it very clear. It's not. I don't think it's bad in the slightest. But it's so weird and kind of uncomfortable because it's such an odd way to play the game. So like anyone who's listening who doesn't fully know what the mechanics are, you can every time you move in the game, that's when time flows. And when you stop moving, time essentially stops. It doesn't completely stop. It kind of just goes very, 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 very slow. But that is the mechanic. It's a first-person shooter. You go through. You're picking every movement because you're thinking, okay, my movements are what's making time flow, so I can literally dodge bullets if I want to. Right? People compare it to like being Neo from the Matrix.
Right.
And if that's true, then it made me realize how much more difficult it would be to be Neo than I realized. Because I thought it would be so crazy easy to just stop bullets and dodge, and turns out that I'm really bad at that. I'm not good at dodging bullets. And you are really good. I've seen you play.
Really good at it, yeah. I think you're not alone in the sense that like something about the freeze mechanic really confuses people. But it's basically like a really interesting mechanic that sort of reverses panic. And it's a celebration of like choking, like when people don't know what to do and they just freeze. It's like that. Like this game rewards you for choking in a weird way.
Yeah. So if you if you feel overwhelmed, and we would all love to just cover our eyes and stop everything, this game literally kind of has that element, right? Where you could be overwhelmed and just stop everything. And I thought that would make it so much easier. Like in my mind, it's like, okay, cool, I can stop everything. And I was thinking in like a tactical way, it'll be like a strategy game, like a turn-based almost, where I can literally plan out all of my movements. Like, okay, they're shooting this way, I can just move this way, and plan everything. But I think from what I can tell, the way that they set up the AI and whatnot, it seems to have that in mind, so that it tricks you to thinking that you're going to dodge bullets by moving one way, and it actually is shooting the opposite way. Like the AI seems to account for your movements a little bit. Like they predict where you're going to end up moving.
Yeah.
And so you yourself have to then double account for that. So they're not acting exactly how you expect them to.
The AI definitely leads you, and I think that's a cool part of the AI. Like all games, it can be boiled down into a simple algorithm though. And that's another part of it. Like I think the game I think the game capitalizes on its like technical literalness. It's very literal in the sense that like you are playing a game about slowing down time, and as such, it is presented to you as a game, both like narratively and stylistically and everything.
Yeah, the colors are as flat as possible, right?
Yeah.
It's not realistic. It looks like an old arcade game, right? With the 3D models being very pixelated and kind of broken up.
It's a really cool look, but it's also really helpful because due to that simplicity, you can notice little details like when the enemy is right about to fire at you, he will suddenly jerk his arm to the left or the right to lead in front of you, and then he will stop in order to steady his aim. So like, and that little moment is like clockwork, and I see it constantly, and I'm always keeping that in mind whenever I'm dodging bullets.
Yeah.
I'm looking at their hand.
And I slowly did. So I beat the whole game. Well, the whole there's a main storyline, and then there's a whole plethora of additional challenges and endless mode things that you can delve into. I did the main storyline, and I will say that by the end of the main storyline, I did start to, I guess, get in tune with the mechanics at least a little bit, like what you were describing, where the enemy is, sort of, there's this weird waver that they do with their arm when they have the gun pointed at you. And I slowly started to kind of figure that out, but it's not second nature to me the way that I think it is for you.
Yeah.
And you did help me a little bit. I texted you when I was like halfway through the story, and I essentially asked you for some pro tips because I felt fairly mediocre at the game. And you gave some pretty good ones aside from just the gun wavering thing. Like, what are some of those pro tips again?
The biggest one I think is there's a certain sequence of options that you have available to you most of the time, which is that you can shoot somebody or you can throw your gun. In the only correct order to do that usually is to shoot your gun first and then throw your gun. Sometimes, however, you don't have enough time and someone is like about to shoot you and you're reloading. If you're in the middle of reloading, I learned fairly quickly that you shouldn't reload. You should just throw the gun, because the enemy gives you that resource immediately. If they have a gun pointed at you and you shoot the gun, it disarms and conveniently flies directly at you most of the time. So you can just grab it and shoot him with his own gun.
Yeah, so and I took that to heart. That was actually a really big tip, it turns out. Because what it essentially does is every time you see an enemy with a gun, you should just, if you have a weapon, you could just throw it at them because you're going to get a new gun.
Yeah.
Right? Because just by the mere fact of hitting them, a new gun flies into the air. And that changes everything. And it's funny because it's at odds with expectation. Because I think anyone who plays a first-person shooter, has played many first-person shooters in video games, your expectation is if you have a gun in your head and you still have bullets, you shoot.
Right.
Right? And you never had such an odd time mechanic to make it so that having bullets is not the factor. It's how long it takes you to reload that becomes the factor.
Right.
And then you literally are just going to throw your gun like a crazy person at this enemy's head, and that is the totally right way to go about it. And it's such a funny way to warp your head around this game, right? Like it's so weird, but also kind of exhilarating once you get into this disposable gun fest.
Yeah, you have to really start thinking like a superhero. It's an amazing experience because it brings me into this mindset where I know that like these people that I'm fighting, these red faceless people, they have really good reflexes, but I have experience. That's pretty much the only difference, is that I've experience fighting way more red guys than these red guys will ever see. They're simple AI. They do the same thing every time. I can always, as long as I don't get careless, which is pretty much always why I end up dying. Maybe someone blindsides me. But as far as strategy, it's pretty set in stone after a while. And it's because I've played a lot. I didn't get particularly good by the time I beat the main campaign, but I was just so compelled to go through the challenge modes and really explore the endless mode that I realized like there's a lot of strategy options that you can find in this game and really hone to a point.
Why do you think this game sucked you in like that? Like compared, because we play a lot of games. You don't always do every single side thing. And I was looking at your save file, and it looked like you were 100%ing every single thing that you could. You've played through the main storyline like multiple times.
Yeah, I might 100% it.
Yeah, and so why is this game so? What do you think it is about these mechanics that are actually worth delving into for that length of time?
it's really thoughtful. The game has an amazing, like I said, the AI is really interesting to read, but also just it's really helpful if you look at it, like just the visual grammar, the fact that all of the enemies are red and everything else is white, and all the weapons are black, and the fact that enemies, when they spawn, a seemingly inconvenient event like enemies spawning out of nowhere is telegraphed by a glowing red like halo around it. The fact that like you're because so much of the game is based on reflexes, your ability to understand what you can and can't do is so important. The developers have put in the this like scan line effect on the enemy or the gun if you're trying to grab a gun to indicate that you can interact with it.
Yeah, and that sort of stuff, like I imagine, because I was watching, okay, so before we recorded this, I watched you play, and you weren't even like pausing time that much anymore. Like you were reaching the point where you're spinning around, cutting people up, throwing your weapons, picking up new weapons, shooting them in the body, and jumping around, and like you were leaping in the air and it's landing on people's heads, which apparently kills them. I didn't even realize that.
Yeah, there's a Mario mechanic in the game.
Yeah, which blows my mind. Now I have to play the game again and try and mess with that. But you weren't even like using the time stop mechanics. What you essentially were using were all of the tricks, all the visual tricks to help you, right? The fact that there's scan lines over enemies when you're able to touch them, so you can just very quickly assess, okay, I can hit them now and just do it real quick. And that's funny because from my perspective, not being as good at the game, when I first started the game, the fact that all the enemies were red, the fact that the environment was completely white and the weapons are all black, all those little telegraph things made me think, oh, this game is going to be so easy, right? Like they sort of give you this feeling like, oh, I'm going to be so overpowered. And it's funny because you can end up that way, but only if you actually interpret the vocabulary properly and actually take the time to really kind of internalize a lot of these symbols, because all of those are just like very quick symbols that you're reading in the environment, right? Of like where to go. Oh, the red's here, shoot at the red. And you don't even think about what you're doing anymore. You're just sort of reacting to colors.
Yeah, I've been trained really well, and I think it's a testament to how far the game pushes you, because it is surprisingly hard. There are definitely situations in even just the main story that are really challenging. There's a story mission very early on where you are thrown into a long hallway with two people shooting at you, and you just have to dodge all the bullets. Like there are moments like that throughout the game that teach you not just what you can do, but what you can be killed by. Like that level killed me a lot because it was really hard to figure out like how to dodge all those bullets. You know,
and you're bringing up something that is kind of an odd aspect of the game, and we can get into that a little bit, which is the narrative or lack thereof. Right? There's not really a narrative in the game, and there's no like rising action and climax and denouement and all that sort of stuff. There's nothing. It definitely leaves you a lot more questions than answers. It seems to me like the game has a lot of world building.
Yeah.
And there are events in the story mode though, right? Like the scene you were talking about. There's like these little events that seem very revealing as far as like taking the, like letting you look behind the curtain of what's happening, right? There's these moments where it's like, oh, am I going to discover the meaning of this machine that I'm in and what the heck's going on with like the chat room and all these little like tertiary elements. And then as you delve further, it doesn't necessarily answer that, but it does sort of give you, at least for me, I do like that the game sort of ends up, by the end of it, you feel as if you got a sense of a world, and you don't fully know the parameters of that world. Like, I don't know why I'm like typing things and I'm talking to like an AI program and it's telling me all these different things, and like it seems like the AI is taking over and there's these elements, but at no point do they explicitly kind of throw that in my face. And that's kind of interesting because it does leave it fairly open. Yeah. Like, what did you think of all that narrative stuff?
I actually explored quite a bit of it, because the game, without giving out any spoilers, there's sort of like there's a secret level to the narrative that you can unlock by sort of exploring the levels a little more. Even though the levels look really simplistic and not worth exploring, there's actually some exploration to be done. And when you do that, you will find a bit more information in the form of text, basically. Yeah. So it's just some more text exposition, and it's fun. I think it's well presented, and I think some of that stuff is pretty well written. Just in the sense that it's very natural. It's a lot of it is based in natural speech, but the narrative, I think even you, having not seen any of that, you've basically grasped the gist of it. You know what it is as much as I do. Largely, the story is just kind of foreshadowing, which I don't know how I feel about that, because on one hand, I think that the game doesn't need a big story. On the other hand, there's an element that where it seemed like it was teased a little bit. It seemed like there were parts of the story that seemed like they were going to go somewhere. They didn't really.
Yeah, I can just describe like my first experience going into the game before I even played it, right? Mm-hmm. You get put up on this menu screen, and there's a whole range of options. There's like because it looks like a computer screen that you have access to, and you get access to this person's whole hard drive, right? Mm-hmm. And so you get access to separate folders. They have games folders and demos folders and an app folder, and you can go into there and you can see all these little different pieces of the computer. And so before I'd even played the game, I thought, okay, this is interesting. Like they're setting up this whole world of like you're sort of learning about this person you're playing, mm-hmm. right? Because based on the kind of apps and the kind of folders that they have. Right. So I thought, okay, why are they doing this? Like, I wonder if like, okay, are they going to reveal something about this person that you are, like who you are, like what you're doing? Like, why are they developing your character in such an odd way? And this game doesn't necessarily pay that off, but like you said, it doesn't. It's not it doesn't hold the game back. I think right. The fact that it doesn't pay it off because the mechanics are so heavy. Yeah. It's such a heavily mechanic focused game, and the game itself is so solid within those mechanics that a lot of that stuff feels like a nice bonus to me rather than a detriment to anything. Like I don't feel disappointed. Mm-hmm. By the fact, because it didn't necessarily like make it so that my enjoyment of the game doesn't seem tied to the narrative at all. It just felt like, okay, there's this nice little world stuff that's kind of being thrown on top of all this cool shooting stuff that I'm doing.
Yeah, my favorite game ever is Dark Souls, and I think so. So I have a natural tendency to compare good things to Dark Souls, but the story in this game, to its credit, is only as limited as that game, and I think that game had a story that didn't reveal itself completely either, but that game also had like a really cool story if you were willing to dig into it. So it might to an extent be my fault. I feel like there's more secrets that I'm yet to uncover.
Something to say about the game, because you bring up Dark Souls right now, and it just makes me think the world building in that game is so specifically video game oriented. Mm-hmm. It's not trying to be a movie. It's not trying to be a book. Another game that I might want to compare this to is Hotline Miami, because Hotline Miami has a similar kind of like, to me, both of these games, Superhot and Hotline Miami, are kind of overwhelming in terms of like when you're barely beginning the game, you feel like such a loser because the game seems so hard and so in your face about its challenge, but the mechanics are so tight that eventually you kind of get in the zone, so to speak. And there were moments, I had moments where I felt like I was in the quote unquote the zone, right? And watching you play, it looks like someone who's like in the zone, who's just sort of so focused on what's happening, everything else around them is just gone, and they're just playing reactively very quickly.
So after our conversation, do you think you're actually interested enough to keep playing it? Do you think you still like the game a lot and you want to play more?
I was already planning on just kind of jumping back. Well, I guess part of the problem for me, I guess I'm intimidated because watching how good you got at it makes me feel like I have so much work ahead of me to have to, the amount of time I'm going to have to spend to get that good. Because I'm so bad. Like you should, if you watch me play, but I'm such a loser at this game. I'm so dumb. Like I throw weapons at people and I miss all the time. And for the longest time, in fact, until you told me, I thought that you could only kill enemies by shooting them in the head, which made for some of the dumbest, bonkers. like just me shooting at the wall because the head is such a small target to have to hit. and just being awkward. Like my replays don't look cool. Like, replays should look cool in this game because, time is slowed. So it's only keeping the times that you move, which should be the perfect times. Right. But my replays, I'm constantly looking around and just kind of ducking. Well, not ducking, but like jumping awkwardly to the left and right. And I just look like a freaking dummy. Anyway.
But I started like that too. There's something really satisfying about certain games that are meticulously designed to allow you to start off as a chump, and I was a chump for a long time, but I felt like there was a richness in the mechanics and the abilities that I was given, that I wanted to become more than that chump.
And the base mechanic of stopping time is super cool, and it's just such a great idea.
Yeah.
And so that is just neat to have a game that pulls that off so well, and they really pulled it off. If you could summarize for us, like what do you think? What do you think of this game overall? Would you recommend it?
I would recommend it, and I would say that the initial draw should just be the novelty of it. It is a very unique game. It has a mechanic unlike any other game. The more you wrap your head around that stuff, the better you'll be at like blowing up crystal red guys. It's a really cool thing to watch yourself do.
Yeah, and I will say, if you're going to get this game, expect a challenge. Like, expect to come up against a wall of like comfortability, because it's not natural. Like the way in which you're playing this game, the way in which you're moving through the world, it's not like any other FPS, and so it's gonna feel weird for a while. But having watched, my brother get better and better at it, there is a high ceiling. It seems to me. Like it seems like if you want to invest the time into this and really, really delve into the mechanics, you can absolutely get good at it. So if that sounds like the kind of game you're into, like if you're someone who really thinks, okay, I'm gonna play the game and I'm gonna figure this game out and I'm gonna figure out all the little secrets and I'm gonna figure out like what's the best, most streamlined way to get through a level, then this game seems perfect for that kind of gamer, I think.
Yeah, it's perfect for me. I really enjoyed it.
Great. So we both recommend it. My brother very, very much so.
It's one of the most innovative shooters I've played in years.
Yes, I have the urge to say that it is one of the most innovative shooters I've played.
Just a really innovative shooter, I think.
Yes. Super hot.
Superhot.
Super hot.
You should play it.